Welcome to Podkey Daily News, your fast brief on the Quake, conflict, and economic pressure points. A major earthquake in Indonesia, deadly strikes in Lebanon, and a global energy choke point are all converging on the same question. How resilient are systems when stress stops being temporary? In Indonesia, a magnitude 7.7 earthquake hit Flores, killing at least 47 people, and that toll is expected to rise because some communities still can't be reached. Authorities issued a tsunami warning and people moved inland fast, shaped by the memory of the 1992 Flores disaster when a tsunami killed more than 2,000 people. This time, the warning was lifted after about 3 hours and no major tsunami followed. The immediate problem now is access. Landslides, weak roads, and mountainous terrain are slowing rescue crews, while damaged homes, shelter needs, clean water, and food are becoming the practical focus. Watch for the death toll to move as isolated areas are reached and for damage assessments to determine whether this becomes mainly a rescue crisis or a longer displacement emergency. In southern Lebanon, Israeli strikes killed 11 people, including 3 children and 2 women from the same family. These were the deadliest strikes since the ceasefire was renewed in June. Israel said it was targeting Hezbollah infrastructure and a commander, and accused Hezbollah of attacking Israeli troops and using civilians as shields. Lebanese authorities rejected that justification and pointed to Israel's own ceasefire record. The timing matters. The strikes landed just before another U.S.-brokered negotiation round, adding more doubt to a framework that already looked shaky because Hezbollah has rejected the agreement. What to watch is whether this remains a severe but contained escalation or whether it further erodes whatever trust was left in the ceasefire channel. The war with Iran is still hitting the global economy through the Strait of Hormuz. Ship traffic there has collapsed from roughly 130 to 140 vessels before the conflict to fewer than a dozen after more than 6 months of war. That is a strategic supply shock, not just a military headline. Analysts say reopening the strait may eventually require politically difficult concessions to Iran, including ideas like transit fees or unfreezing funds. The knock-on effect is broader than crude oil. Disruptions tied to Iran, Ukrainian attacks on Russian infrastructure, and Chinese fuel export restrictions have removed millions of barrels of refined products and kept refining margins high. For U.S. consumers, that helps explain why gasoline remains about 25% higher than a year ago, even as some other inflation measures cool. On the U.S. economy, inflation cooled modestly. Consumer prices rose 0.1% from June to July. Annual inflation came in at 3.4%. Core inflation was 2.5% year over year, and wholesale prices were flat. That is progress, but it does not feel clean on the ground. Consumer sentiment in August dropped to 51 from 55.2, with higher gas prices and the Iran conflict weighing on confidence. Retail sales fell 0.6% in July, though that was partly distorted by Amazon moving Prime Day into June. Sales were still about 5% above a year earlier, so this looks more like slowing than collapse. There is also a shift in who is spending. Bank of America card data showed lower-income consumers spent more in July while higher-income consumers pulled back, especially reversing the usual pattern around restaurants. The catch is sustainability. Credit card debt is still rising, and while the New York Fed has not seen a major jump in late payments yet, borrowing-driven spending only works until it doesn't. Above all of this sits the federal balance sheet. Forecasters expect the deficit to top $2 trillion this year. Total debt is moving toward roughly $40 trillion, and interest on that debt is now the government's second largest expense after Social Security. That matters because higher Treasury yields do not stay in Washington. They feed directly into private borrowing costs, including mortgage rates near 6.7%. In Ceuta, the Spanish enclave on Morocco's coast, the migration crisis is widening from a humanitarian strain into a broader European political fight. After an earlier mass crossing in which tens of thousands reached Ceuta and around 100 people died trying to swim there, Moroccan police have been blocking new border approaches. But thousands of migrants remain in beachside shantytowns facing rubbish overflow, food and water shortages, untreated injuries, and asylum backlogs in a city of about 85,000 people. Spain has reinforced the border and imposed restrictions. Italy has suspended Schengen free movement with Spain, and other EU members are backing renewed border checks. Watch this as both a humanitarian bottleneck and a test of how quickly migration pressure can fracture European free movement politics. Zambia's vote count was briefly halted after reports of violence, including property destruction, attacks on election officials, intimidation, and alleged abductions. International observers described a constrained democratic space, which matters because Zambia has long been seen as a relative success story for peaceful transfers of power since 1991. President Hakainde Hichilema campaigned on growth and reform, but many voters say those gains have not reached ordinary households, especially with unemployment and living costs still biting. The key thing to watch is whether the count resumes with enough legitimacy to preserve confidence in the result, or whether economic frustration turns a contested election into a deeper governance problem. A different kind of readiness warning is coming from the U.S. Navy. The USS Abraham Lincoln was reportedly deployed for more than 250 days, with shortages of fresh food, soap, clean water, mail, and care packages. Similar concerns were raised about the USS Boxer and sanitation issues on USS Ford. Navy and Pentagon officials blamed wartime resupply priorities, operational demands, and supply chain problems. This matters because it points to a sustainment problem, not a technology problem. Advanced ships and weapons do not mean much if basic living conditions aboard major warships start to break down during extended deployments. Families have already confronted Navy leadership in San Diego, so watch whether this stays a morale issue or becomes a broader readiness and retention story. Primary polls remain a rough instrument. Since 2014, primary election polls have missed by about 13 points on average, with late voter movement and turnout uncertainty doing much of the damage. Useful? Yes. Precise? No. Reddit is joining the S&P 500, and the bigger signal is strategic. Researchers found Reddit is the most cited website in AI-generated answers, which raises its value for brands trying to influence chatbot output. In Spain, investigators are looking into apparent pellet gun wounds on an older female orca known as Tony, a case that sharpens the conflict between sailors worried about vessel damage and conservationists focused on a socially important animal leading her pod. And in sport, the reported death of 19-year-old cyclist Finley Tarling after a vehicle entered the Tour of Portugal course has renewed pressure for stronger route security, especially at smaller races that do not have Tour de France-level protections. That's the brief for now. You've been listening to Podkey Daily News. Come back for the next high signal update. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.